You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fika. Our guest today is John Kachuba. I had mentioned to Michelle DeRoche of The Outer Realm with Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano, a very popular show here on United Public Radio Network, that I was looking for a ghost story. And she suggested John. And he was exactly the author I was looking for. Not only does he write ghost stories, but he's recently published Haycorn Smith and the Castle Ghost, a tale for ages 12 and up. And he wrote it well. Perhaps that's because he is a creative writing teacher at Ohio University, author groups, and workshops. Or perhaps it's because he's a paranormal investigator who's written several books, nonfiction books on that subject. But whatever the reason, Mr. Kachuba took me back to a time when ghost stories were my favorite thing in the whole world. Whether they were told by my grandmother at the kitchen table, with friends by the campfire, read or watched. The world needs more Haycorn Smith, John. So let's make it a series, please. But before that, welcome to Fika.
Thank you, Vicky. It's good to be here. I appreciate those positive comments. A series, great. The publisher is actually talking about that, so maybe we'll make that happen soon.
That would be, I just think it would be so popular. It is such, but we'll get into that later, or I'll do the whole show in the first 5 minutes because I'm so excited about Haycorn. So we're going to talk a little bit about why people are so interested in ghost stories and such things. But before we start that, I'd like to know what interests you in those things. What got you started?
Well, I grew up in Connecticut. I grew up back in New England. And growing up, I heard all the sort of folklore of the area as well as the real history of the area. And I've always really liked the history. But I've always liked the folklore too. And in New England, a lot of that folklore was about ghosts. So from an early age, I was surrounded by sort of ghost stories, as well as being able to, walk down the street a little bit and find an 18th century cemetery or graveyard, and being able to look at tombstones with skulls and crossbones and all that kind of stuff on it. So I just loved all that. But the other thing too is, as I got older, I started looking more at sort of my own sense of spirituality. And pretty much my entire life, I've been on, I don't want to say a quest, that sounds really dramatic, but I've always been exploring my spirituality and the idea of the spiritual and the metaphysical. And so when you start thinking along those lines, the questions, the big eternal questions come up all the time that we all ask. Is there something there after death? What's it like? I grew up in a very strict Catholic family, and there was heaven and hell and afterlife and all that. So looking at all that, I kept thinking, what does that mean? What does that say sort of in, I don't want to say practical terms, but in sort of real life terms, and not even put real life in air quotes, although I refuse to do air quotes in person.
You didn't use the fingers anyway, so that's a plus.
I did not use the fingers. So, because what I mean by that is, people always have ghost stories of their own. They have personal ghost stories. And as I've been working in this field since 2004 now, I give a lot of talks at libraries and universities and conferences. And people always come up to me afterwards and tell me their personal ghost stories. So there is something going on. People are having experiences. What the nature of those experiences are certainly debatable. But they're having these experiences. So I'm out there questioning what is this all about? And it just piques my interest. So I've always been interested in that. And the interesting thing is, as I look back now, I had two ghosts. Well, I've written like 5 different nonfiction ghost books since 2004. And Haycorn, of course, is a paranormal novel for younger readers, fiction, but we could talk.
Wait. I don't like to argue with guests, but I wouldn't say it was just for younger readers.
Okay. Well, thank you, because I've actually had a lot of adults say, "Yeah, I read that book and I liked it." So
yeah,
okay. But what's funny is as I look back on some of my earlier writing, short stories that have been published or other types of books or whatever, invariably I will find that there's some character in there that has a ghost experience, or that there might actually be a ghost in there. So it's been like in my subconscious, forever, apparently.
It's a part of you.
It's a part of me. I'm part ghost. I didn't know that, but apparently I am. Part thing.
Not yet, anyways. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I'm Ukrainian, Sicilian, and Phantom. Who knew?
And you heard it here first on Fika with Vicky.
Right. That's a long-winded story, but it's always been part of my nature, and it still is. I'm still very much interested in not just sort of ghosts and the paranormal, but spirituality and metaphysics generally.
Now, do you find it easier to write about ghosts because you know this, and this has been a part of your life study, let's say, for a very long time, or do you feel a little like you may be, some people might argue with it, or I know that within the book itself, there was a mention that some people were not good with their kids watching the ghost shows, the ghost hunting shows, or whatever. So are you ever hesitant about that, or is it going to be a thing, John? I'm good with it being a thing myself.
Are there air quotes for that? Finger motions for a thing? I don't know. There should be. We should invent that right here on your show. Well, I think that's a good point, because in Haycorn, there is the main character, Haycorn's best friend, is a kid named Budge, and Budge's father is very strict, and Budge's father does not want him watching the ghost hunter kind of programs, the so-called true stories of people out there doing paranormal investigation. There's also a point later on, I think, in a conversation between the two boys. I'm trying to recall exactly who said what, but it comes up where ghosts are the work of the devil, and so if you believe in ghosts, you're believing in sort of devil worship or whatever. And the Bible does have some quotes about, like things like "suffer not a witch to live," and demons and sorcerers and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's there. Yeah. So
it's problematic, that book.
Yeah. In so many ways, yeah. So to answer your question, I don't worry about the effects that it might have, because what I'm trying to do, and I do it in Haycorn, subtly. I mean, I don't slam people with it, but I try to point out that there are different viewpoints, there are different beliefs, and that not everybody thinks the same way. Certainly not everybody in the world believes that there are ghosts. I mean, we know that, right? There are a lot of people that do, a lot of people that don't. There's a lot of people that believe there are devils and demons and angels, and a lot of people that don't. So I'm not here to say who's right, because I don't know. I mean,
you're just a writer.
I'm a writer.
Making up a story.
Right, I'm a writer. But what I need to do is, especially for younger readers, is I'd like to open their minds to the possibilities. I have 11 grandchildren of my own, and thank God I don't see them being sort of hidebound in their thought processes at this point. But that could happen to any child. So what I want to do is, in my writing, is I want to make sure that there's a door that's open all the time, so a child can, or a young reader, not necessarily a child, any of my readers, even my adult readers,
or Vicky,
there you go. But they can look at something and say, "Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about it in that way. Maybe there's something here." And that's whether we're talking about ghosts or anything else. I try to sort of just make sure my readers understand that I am not necessarily coming down on one side of something and saying this is the way.
Right. You're hoping that they will become critical thinkers.
Exactly.
By reading these books.
Exactly. And that's something that, at least in this country, in our school system, we're getting away from critical thinking. And it's sad, but we are. So if I can do my little bit to help readers be more critical thinkers, yay.
Oh, okay. I just, and Cindy says hi, John.
Hi, Cindy. I know Cindy.
I figured you did because she was like, "Hi, John," on a first name basis.
Well,
It just felt like there was a knowledge there.
right. But you notice I put it, my name is only John, first name here too. So.
This is true, but I know that we're going to be great friends in the future, so I feel okay calling you John. You can't have Fika without becoming friends, John. It's just the way it is.
All right.
So, no, but you bring up several different social issues. And I think the best books for that age group do. They don't hit the subject. But, that innocence of childhood myth that is out there. There's kids facing a lot scarier things than ghosts. And you brought up one of them in the book. I don't want to give up too many spoilers, but, it's something. It is something that happens in that world. If you make a series, I want someone's father to come home. Okay, don't you go there with me.
Well, okay.
I'm making a lot of demands, but I will be checking up, John, for later. So in that way, when you read that age group's books, some of the writers can be sort of condescending. Okay, they're not really talking to 12-year-olds. They apparently don't know 12-year-olds. And there's not a lot of respect, I feel, in that. But your writing was very respectful. I could feel like it was very caring for those kids out there. So how, as a writer, do you bring that across, John?
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that because that's something that I really tried to do. I tried to not be the adult in the room, who has all the answers and knows everything. I think for me, I did a couple of things. First of all, I just tried to remember what it was like for me when I was 12. Budge, by the way, Haycorn's best friend, Budge Shiflett, was also my best friend when I was 12 and younger, and that was his name, Budge Shiflett.
Oh, really? Was it?
Yeah. First on Vicky, hearing it first.
Does Budge know?
Well, Budge passed away when he was about 20 or 21. So in some ways, some ways this is kind of a testimonial to Budge too. But so I tried to, remember what it was like. I certainly can remember events. I can remember the trouble we got into all the time. I can remember the good times, and I can remember some, things that weren't as good. But having said that, it was hard still, a little difficult to capture sort of the voice that I wanted. So for that, I kind of relied on my 11 grandkids. I don't see them as much as I like because they don't live nearby, but I do stay in touch with them. And I think when I'm with them, I think I can relate more to them on their level than as an adult. Now, if I was their parents, I'd probably be the strict adult who has all the answers. But as grandpa, it's like, hey, whatever you guys want, So I think I can relate a little bit better to them in that regard. And so I think
you're on that friend level.
Yeah, you kind of are, because you're there for a while. You get to play with them, hang out with them. I have a granddaughter who does live close to me, and she brings her guitar and ukulele over, and I play both, and we jam together. And she's like 12, So that's good. And all that helps. And I think I might have lost my train of thought. But anyway, I think that is how I can kind of relate to that kind of to a child without being condescending, without talking down to them, but trying to sort of understand where they are. And the biggest thing for me as sort of a writer was to learn to listen. Writers talk, right? I mean, I'm talking a blue streak here, and we write. But for this kind of work, I feel that I really need to listen to kids a lot, young readers a lot. And so I've been doing that with some different groups and things, and it's been interesting.
So that's kind of the problem with trends in publishing. Like young adult is popular, so there are writers who are like, I'll write young adult. But what you're saying is, don't write for an audience if you don't spend time with them.
Well, I think you have to know your audience, no matter what level you're.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Like if you're writing, cozy mysteries, know the kind of person who reads cozy mysteries.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it doesn't. You kind of have to keep your audience in mind, not just
Right. And I know when I was a kid, when I was at that age group, I mean, I read everything I can get my hands on. There wasn't one thing. I mean, yeah, I read ghost stuff, but I read anything. I had cereal boxes. I mean, anything. If it had print, I read it. I still do. So, yeah, you have to keep that in mind too. That especially younger people, they're curious, they're inquisitive, they want to know about a lot of different things. So, don't go thinking that there's only one thing that they're interested in.
Oh, yeah, no, because well, for heaven's sakes, they're people.
Yeah.
People are not all interested in one thing, regardless of. That's one of the things I liked about this novel as well, is there tends to be a thing with, I don't believe that, so I'm referencing that right now. Okay. But some people will say, oh, those young people, all they do is this and all they do is that. And I keep thinking, no, you can play computer games and walk in wilderness and like them both. And you reflected that in this book. So also I appreciated that as well, John.
Okay.
So also, when you're writing a book like this, like do you feel like you do have a responsibility to be careful about things or more sensitive about things? Like if you were talking to one of your students at university, would you give them some heads up on stuff that they shouldn't do? Or
Well, for that age group particularly, I would say yes. I think for adults, I would more or less just say do whatever you want. But for adults, I'm for young people, I'm careful about what I put out there, the topics I talk about. Not even so much the topics I talk about is how I talk about them, I think is the more important thing. And so, for instance, with this particular novel, this particular age group, there's no sex, there's no drugs, there's no mass murders. Now, the unfortunate thing is that that's part of the real world, right?
No, you can take
I mean, so these kids are exposed to it in real life. They see it in the news. Unfortunately, some actually have experiences that are relative to those things. So for a slightly older group, maybe like, late teens or something like that, sure, I talk about that because that's very much a part of their world. I think for this age group, I'm more inclined to keep that kind of thing on the periphery.
Or from their experience, like if they mention it from their experience.
Yeah, I mean, so like right now in this book, there's guys and girls have a crush on each other, that kind of thing. It doesn't go much further than that. Who knows? There's a possibility of a series where Haycorn grows, gets older, instead of just saying 12. In that case, then he would also have experiences that would reflect coming of age, becoming more mature and having those experiences.
Well, and some of these experiences are teaching him how to behave when he gets older.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Because it is a learning curve, and like that's what I'm saying. There's lots of room for these characters to grow and and to move into a series. I will say series maybe every 5 minutes. Just so that it goes into your mind. So, and Haycorn just came out like did it come out the 1st of July?
Well, actually June 14th. So
June 14th.
About a month and a half or so.
And it's available at
it's on Amazon right now. Yeah, and it's in libraries. It's getting into libraries and bookstores. That's a much slower process. But yeah, it's on Amazon as of June 14th. So it's in hardcover, paperback, and also ebook
format. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going off chart here because it's interesting. Loveland, Ohio, is a real place.
Yes.
And yes, that's the real name, right?
Yes.
And does it do like a booming business on Valentine's weekend? Because like I would think,
So,
let's go to Loveland.
so here we go. So Loveland's seal of the city is it's a red heart, and it's encircled by the words "Sweetheart of Ohio." So every Valentine's Day, yes, there's a Valentine's lady that is named every year, and she and her staff go to the post office and they hand cancel Valentine cards with a special Valentine's Day postmark,
Oh,
which
oh, oh.
every year.
This has to be written down. This is like way
Yeah.
too good.
So people from all around the world send cards to the Loveland post office to be hand canceled. And I know some of the Valentine ladies, and they're going to kill me for saying this because now they're going to get 1,000 more cards to hand cancel next year. So it's been a thing. There's a wall in a park in Loveland that has a picture of all the Valentine ladies over the years on it. So it's a big deal. I lived in Loveland for several years, and my wife was on city council there. So
So there's you do write what you
yeah,
know.
oh yeah. There's anybody living in Loveland or even the greater Cincinnati area reading this book might say, "Oh, I've been there. I know those people."
Because the
That's the castle.
castle itself, I just put it up on Facebook, a link to the castle, because I think that's so cool, because there is
Yes,
a Loveland castle.
yes. It's named formally named Chateau La Roche, but they call it the Loveland Castle, and it was the handiwork of one man over about 50 years, Harry Andrews, who literally built it by dragging stones up out of the Little Miami River and building this scale model of a 10th century castle. It's phenomenal, and you can go in it. I mean, it's furnished inside and everything else, and it's awesome. It's a great place.
So just Google Loveland Castle,
Mm-hmm.
people, if you want to see pictures of it, and there it is. I want to carry on this location thing because I had a thought, but Brian Greiner would like to know, given that you teach creative writing, how does that affect your writing process? Does your own writing affect how you teach creative writing? So, and I had wanted to ask, does it make you hesitant? Like you have something to prove now, John, to your students?
So let's see. So given that you teach, affect your writing process. That sounds like a circular argument in a way. So, I mean,
which affects which?
My writing does certainly affect my own personal writing. It certainly affects how I teach creative writing. And one thing I tell all my students, so I teach through the Gotham Writers Workshop, which is an online program, but I also taught obviously at Ohio University. I've taught universities and conferences and things like that. So I taught a lot. And one thing I always tell my students is that there really aren't hard and fast rules to creative writing, especially fiction. Every time somebody comes out with a rule that you cannot do this when you write, somebody will break that rule and it'll be a bestseller. So what I always tell people is that I'm one writer giving you what works for me, what works best for me. It may not work for you. So out of all the things that I tell you in class or whatever online, take what works, try it. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you and you have a better system, have at it, because we're all individuals. We all work differently. So I think how I work and how I write certainly affects how I teach, because I'm not the kind of instructor or teacher that would say,
do this,
check these points off, and if you don't get them, you get an F or something. No, it's like, if you show me that you're writing, if you show me that you're progressing in your own way with your own work, and that you're getting better, then I feel like I had, maybe it's not fair, but I feel I had something to do with that. And so that's how I would grade you or judge you if in an academic setting, accordingly to that. So it's rare, when I was teaching, especially in universities, and I had to give a grade, it was pretty rare to flunk or get a D in my class, because that basically meant you never showed up. That's about it. The first part of that, I already lost the first part of that question. So,
did you want? Okay, given that you teach creative writing, how does that affect your writing process? So it's the other way. Yeah, it's both ways. How do they affect each other?
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting there, I'm not sure that there's a process necessarily, is that sometimes when I'm working with my students, I will find somebody who is more advanced even than I thought, and they might surprise me with something, which is good because it's something that I will recognize as some technique. Like, wow, I see what he did here, and that's really amazing. I hadn't thought about that, and so I might do that myself. I guess what I'm saying is, even though I'm a teacher, I'm always a student as well, and so I pick up stuff from my own students. So I think it's sort of a circular process. I give to them, and hopefully they take something from me. But at the same time, they're giving to me, and I get a chance to sometimes take something from them.
Right. It's balance.
Yeah, I look at it as a partnership. Again, sort of not being the adult in the room. Yeah, okay, I'm a published writer. I've had a lot of publications and things like that, but I'm still always a learner. And there's a lot of writers who I know who I would love to be able to write as well as they do. And I can't, because they're doing something magical that I haven't learned how to do yet. But maybe if I keep studying them, I'll pick it up at some point.
Well, I know that even Neil Gaiman, the one idea he had, and I can't remember the book now, he pulled that out several times and kept saying, no, I'm not there yet. I'm not ready to write this.
Right.
And then I, of course, interpreted that as, well, if he's not ready yet, what chance do I have?
Well, here's the thing, if you have to get started somewhere before you can be ready yet. You got to be ready. So you at least do that much.
Yeah. And to go, you have to do. I actually have a segment I do, the wannabe author, the quest of the wannabe author. I have no problems using the word quest. I love being dramatic. So, and, some of us discuss the things like every person is different. Know thyself as a rule, because you're going to be different than everybody else in the process. John, I am officially inviting you to one of those segments. Okay. You can say no off the screen, but no, because I need all the help I can get. Okay, so
all right.
To get this thing going. Now, we've discussed the fact that back to locations. I'm sorry, this will happen. Oh, yeah. So it was interesting when I knew that Loveland was a real place. When you said earlier in the show that you grew up in Connecticut, the Maine area, because that's where Dark Entry takes place, isn't it?
Yes.
Isn't it? So you had that connection there as well.
Right.
Okay. So real places. John likes to go for the real places. He knows. And it does help with the atmosphere. I'm saying it does definitely do that. Now, one of my favorite things about this book is, because I'm that kind of person. One of my favorite things is that in Haycorn Smith, your fictional novel, you plugged maybe it was a plug, but your nonfiction book, Ghost Hunting Ohio, and I must have laughed for I don't know how long, because I thought, well, that is very cheeky, John.
It was very cheeky. Yeah, it was. Well, and by the way, I don't plug it. Haycorn plugs it. I had nothing to do with that.
I was just like, oh yes. He went there.
He watches the ghost shows on TV, reads ghost books, and he happened to read Ghost Hunting Ohio. I mean, what can I say?
A smart kid. Haycorn's a smart kid. Brian is back. Does your course cover the business and production side of writing? That is how to go from having a written story to getting it published, either traditionally or self-published.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so right now the courses that I'm teaching, I teach a humor writing course through Gotham, and I've been doing that for a long time. And there's a little bit about the business side there, but not too much. It's mostly about writing humor. I'm not teaching a course like that per se. I was teaching one at Antioch here in Yellow Springs, Ohio, that had it was basically called I forgot what it was called, but it was nothing about craft or the art of writing. It was all about what it means to be a professional writer. So was all the nuts and bolts about getting published, how to find agents, all that, how to market, how to promote yourself, even things like, what does it mean to be a writer in your personal life? How does that affect your family? How has your life changed? So that was a great course at Antioch. I had a lot of people sign up for that. Unfortunately, they're no longer doing any of the writing stuff at Antioch. So the short answer, Brian, is I don't have that course now, but I don't know, maybe at some future point. I like that. I do that frequently at like universities and conferences because it's a one-off that they're okay about me doing. And I think it's interesting and important for writers to know all that stuff. And there's not a lot everything's about craft for the most part.
Well, yeah, no, you get to that point and you're like, where do I go from here? And you have worked as like a freelance editor and things. So you've been helpful in that transition for people.
Mm-hmm.
Dave would like to know if you use historic paranormal stories and incorporate them into your stories or novels. Historic paranormal stories, like things that you have picked up with your interest in history.
Yeah. Well, so Dark Entry is an example of that. We could talk about that a little bit, but the location is a real location in Connecticut called Dark Entry, and it has a history. It has a history to it of being settled in the early 18th century, and sort of a history of its inhabitants going insane or committing suicide and things like that over a period of a couple of decades, and then the village emptying out, just being abandoned. So there's that history that I put in there. There's in Haycorn, you have the historical aspect of the real castle and Harry Andrews, and that's true. That's history. But I know you're talking about more in terms of like a historical novel with paranormal elements. I have some ideas for some of those, and I'm working on some, but I've been reading some lately, and I'm going to give a plug to some other writers. I just read The Fervor, Fervor, by Amla Katsu, Katsu. And she was a runner-up in this year's Bram Stoker Award for Nonfiction, for a novel. And it's historical. It has to do with the Japanese-American internment camps during World War II here. It's an excellent book. So I mean, I like history as it is, and I really like historical fiction that has some other element. I have a book coming out in November that I'm co-authoring with a cousin, and it's called The Bottle Conjurer, and it's historical, based on an 18th century hoax that was perpetrated in London, England, and we make it more historical fantasy, paranormal, kind of a little bit of both. So it's great. And my favorite paranormal kind of books are ones that are based on real history.
So no, it makes it more real. I think it's important to have that real grounding so that the author doesn't go anywhere they want to. There's still a certain rule or boundaries, and that they have to make it. Yeah, I like my fantasy controlled. But you were a member of the Historical Fiction Association as well as the Horror Writers Association.
Historical Novel Society.
Historical Novel Society.
And the Horror Writers Association. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's just part of who you are, John. There's no secrets. John is out there exactly who he is.
My life is an open book.
And you're going to write about, he definitely writes about the people he knows and the places. So people who know you have to be careful.
Right. Did you ever see those T-shirts? Like, I'm a writer, I'm going to put you in my next book. Be careful what you say. It's here with me, you man.
So, and Dave would also like to know, do you have a favorite ghost or paranormal story from history that you might like to work on someday?
Wow. That's interesting. I don't know. I've been thinking recently about the Paris catacombs, which isn't a particular event.
But it's a place. It's a place. A lot can happen in that place. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was there, I guess maybe at 3 years, well, just prior to COVID, the year before COVID. I was there, and First of all, I stood online for 2.5 hours to get into the catacombs. But the interesting thing was, it's an incredibly creepy place. But the day before I was on that tour, 2 teenage boys were rescued from the catacombs who had gotten lost. They went to one of these old sealed off entrances. They found their way in and they got lost in there, and they were gone for about 4 days. Finally, some, dogs, rescue dogs,
Found them.
Found them, yeah, and they were okay. They were suffering from hypothermia and they were hungry, but they're otherwise okay. But
all you have to do is take those 2 names and change them to Haycorn and Budge.
Haycorn and Budge, lost in the catacombs. Well, I'll tell you that place that's like over the top compared to Loveland Castle.
Well, and that would definitely get their mother snake eyes going.
Yeah, that's right. Haycorn? There are some interesting stories. I mean, I'm sort of brought to that. I'm also very interested in Shapeshifters, and my last nonfiction book was a nonfiction book called Shapeshifters: A History. And what I found there is that when we think of shapeshifters, we think of sort of the quintessential shapeshifter, the werewolf. Everybody knows that, right? You're a man or you're a wolf, and you go back and forth. But what I found in my book is that there are literally, there's thousands of different kinds of shapeshifters in cultures all around the world. Almost every culture has had some kind of a shapeshifter character in it, if not more than one. And I really got sort of stuck in a Japanese culture because they had an incredible line of shapeshifters that were also ghosts. They were ghosts and shapeshifters at the same time. And most of them were murderous, and revengeful. So that's not necessarily history, but in a way it sort of is. I'm looking at
it's cultural history, isn't it? Folklore.
Yeah.
It sort of describes, if you understand the people's stories, it gives you more insight into the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
so I'm playing around with that a little bit.
And Japan, like when you think about the manga and things like that, and I know I grew up with my kids, and I was like, oh my goodness, what is happening in this stage? But it is just chocked full of demons and things like that, vengeful creatures and that. So yeah, I can see that would be very colorful and in depth.
Yeah.
Definitely. I also wanted to mention that to any of the writers that may be listening to this out there, John's books would be an incredible resource if you want to write anything in this type of genre. Take a look at them, like Shapeshifters or whatever. Nod your head, yes, John. You can sell yourself. Yes. Anyone who can put their nonfiction book. Yes. Brian would like to know, what would you like to know now, Brian? Oh, he's just saying there's a movie about the catacombs, as above, so below.
I have seen that movie, Brian.
And do you think it's strange as well?
Weird. It was very, very weird. It was a good movie. It was well done, but it was just like, what? So are we upside down? It was, you have to see it to understand it.
Okay, now I'm going to have to watch this movie so I can be part of the gang. Okay, as above, so below. I should remember that.
Yeah, you're kind of lost in the catacombs is kind of the shorthand for it. But the people that did the movie took kind of a weird twist on it, I thought, too. So
when we talk about that age group, you said you read everything, but was there a particular book that stands out for you from that we can maybe say,
when I was that age, one thing I read all the time was there used to be these great horror fan magazines.
Oh my gosh, you're Brian's best friend. Go ahead. Because he likes all of that fiction from that era. Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
sorry.
I'm a little bit older than you, probably. I'm guessing. I'm sure. And so that was a big thing, and it was all the old, Boris Karloff and Lon Chaney Jr. and all these guys, and the Creatures from Black Lagoon and Frankenstein and the Werewolf and the Wolfman and the Mummy and you name it, all that stuff. I love those, but they weren't so much stories. They're more just kind of pictures and articles about them and stuff too. But I did read a lot of ghost stories. I'm just trying. I don't know a specific book as much as I just always liked the ghost stories. And I used to always watch the I think every part of America had a Saturday afternoon TV matinee with some weird
And
horror ghost host, in my area where I grew up, it was Zachary. His name was Zachary. And he had hair like Einstein. He's always in a laboratory with beakers and things boiling over and everything. But he would show these movies, some of these really good ghost movies. And
it was Sunday afternoon B-rated movies. If it wasn't that, it was Jason and the Argonauts. I mean, I think it helped a lot of people to get into mythology. It did with me. Yeah. It was just a great time for a cheesiness. It wasn't at the time.
But I also read some of the real classic ones. I mean, I always loved A Christmas Carol when I first read it, and then after seeing, especially the 1930 something version of it was still my favorite. But I read it.
Was that the one with Alistair Sims?
I think so. I think
we used to watch it every Christmas Eve, and I swear that just stood with me forever.
Yeah. So I read that, and even as a kid, I mean, I remember reading The Turn of the Screw when I was probably about 12 or so. Henry James, and it's an interesting ghost story, but it's more a psychological. I'm sure a lot of people have read it. It's a weird story, but so I always liked that stuff that was on the verge of the kind of weird, and invariably there was a ghost or a possible ghost in it. Yeah.
And then there's Scooby-Doo.
Well, there's that. Yeah.
But
orange.
So you loved ghost stories at that time, and we've discussed that we both have little free libraries, and I have noticed that in that middle grade reading age, that the ghost stories the ghost books just fly off the shelf. Like that is what they want. What do you think attracts kids that age to ghosts? Like, is it because we're learning we're not immortal, or?
I think there's a couple things. I think possibly what you're saying, at that age, they might be becoming a little more cognizant of the fact that we're not immortal. I don't know how hard that registers with them still, unless they have circumstances where parents die or something along those lines, something tragic like that. But for the most part, I don't think they're not thinking very hard about that. But I think they're aware that, things do change. People do die. There might be something else. But I think the other popularity has to do with ghost stories are scary, right? So we read them to be scared. We read them to get a fright. But I think we do that. I say we as if I'm a kid, but I think even adults too do this as sort of a way of dealing with the horrors of the real world. As I said earlier, we know, at least in America, when I was a kid, when I was in school, we would do drills where we'd hide under the desk because you're afraid of the Russians dropping a bomb. Okay.
Yeah, that's scary stuff. Scarier than ghosts.
It was. I mean, you thought about it. You thought, wow, this is, But here, a kid can go to school and he can see somebody next to him get shot in a classroom. That never happened. Russians never dropped a bomb on us.
No.
And that was so remote, even thought about it. But now you have kids that can actually talk about, well, the school down the street from me, there was a mass shooting or something. So there's that. There's, just the real world with war and everything. What I'm saying is there's a lot of horror and fear in the real world. And I think that kids today might be under more stress maybe than
I think so.
My generation. I don't know if that's true or not, but, it's possible. So what do you do with that? How do you deal with that fear? Well, one way is to embrace it, but to embrace it in a way, vicariously, in a way that is not going to hurt you, that's not going to harm you. So it's a ghost story. It's a horror movie. It's a monster movie. All those kinds of things, I think, I'm not a psychologist here, but
no.
By the way,
disclaimer. Do I have to put the disclaimer in the little scroller there?
I'm not a psychologist. I am not a nuclear physicist. I am not a chiropractor.
She's a mirror writer.
Yeah. So, So I mean, I think there might be something that it gives them some outlet to express that fear and to deal with it. The other thing, and now I might be a little psychologist here, but kind of crazy. If you think about ghosts occupy sort of a liminal space in existence, right? I mean, they're not alive, but they're not really truly dead either. If they're really dead, they'd be buried. But they're there. They're in between. They're in this liminal space. And that's exactly what a 12-year-old kid is. They're not a child where they're, playing on the floor with toys and stuff and blocks, but they're also not an adult where they're smoking and drinking. Well, some might be. Or driving.
No, but they don't have all the freedoms.
Right. So they're in a transitional state. They're transitioning from one position to another. And right now it's a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty because they are in the middle. Well, with ghosts, the whole thing is uncertainty and confusion, right? We don't know if they're, people think they're real. Some people think they're not real. We don't even know what they would be or what they're supposed to be. So I think children, young readers can almost identify, and they would probably never verbalize this, but I think on sort of a subconscious level, they might be able to identify with a ghost that way.
And sometimes they even feel invisible. Like their opinions don't matter. Okay, John, you may not be a psychologist, but I'm going to cut this off in a short reel. I think this is like really good stuff. Okay, I'm thinking this is really good stuff. Brian and Dave, I'm ignoring you for a minute because I actually have questions I want to ask. It's okay. One's a friend, one's a husband. I can talk that way to them. Okay, so before we go any further, Dark Entry is a completely different book than Haycorn. It is dark. It's more mature. The problems and the relationships are more complicated. The all of that is more complicated. And some people, which did you find more difficult on yourself to write?
Well, I think Dark Entry was probably more difficult. And there's a few reasons for it. One is that the protagonist is a woman. So I'm speaking from a woman's point of view, a woman's voice, right? And I'm okay, again, disclaimer, I'm not a woman, so we know. So that was a little bit difficult in the sense of trying to get that right. I do have, besides my wife, I have some other beta readers, most of whom are women. So they looked at that too and, would call me out and say, it doesn't sound quite right. So that was helpful. So that was one thing. The second part of that is that the protagonist is also coming out of an abusive relationship. And I have no experience in that. I never, my parents were not like that. My wife and I are happily married, so I don't have any firsthand experience of that. So that, I don't know how that comes across. I hope it comes across as authentic.
I thought actually, when you mentioned that, you were writing as a woman, I kind of forgot that at certain times because you did it well.
Okay. Well,
so I didn't see any, I think that is the way a person acts, even though that surprises people coming out of an abusive situation, because, I don't want to go into any more, but yeah. I think it was good, I thought.
Oh, good. There was one other problem I had with that too, though, was that there's the time, the chronology in the book changes. It begins, the prologue begins back in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm. But it's important that it's there because it gives us the grounding.
You need that. But then we're in the present tense. The present is 1989, so it's not even a present. It's contemporary, but 89 is getting old now too. But then there's a whole other part where it switches back to the mental health facility and the doctor and all that stuff, and that's 19th century again, and we're back to so sort of getting that sort of back and forth chronology in sync, and hoping that it doesn't confuse people. That was a little difficult. That's always difficult when you're not doing a straight narrative.
Some books, I don't know, I didn't have a problem with it. It worked for me, John. That's all that matters in the context of this show. It worked. I thought it was no. I don't think so. And there were things like I put in my review, that story really did go to the last page. And you didn't really know how exactly it was going to turn out.
Oh, good.
So it wasn't like there were 2 chapters at the end of, it just finished and that was it. Everything was complete. And you're going, okay, I'll get over this someday. John doesn't care. Okay. Brian says, you've written books aimed at the young adults. Do you have any books specifically aimed at older adults? And we're talking retirement. Well, you can't even say that because people retire. We're talking older, John. We're not. That sometimes we age out of some genres.
Well, most of my adult books are written for probably, I don't know, I would say, adults, maybe somebody not like me, maybe I'm too old to read my own books. I don't know.
No, but I mean, I read Haycorn, and I would read more because it brings back the nostalgia of that area for us, as well as being contemporary. So I don't think there's actually ages of books, but yeah, you do sometimes go looking for something that's in your age.
Right. And I think I can say right now that I'm probably not writing anything from my age at this point. Everything is younger. Even my adult books are probably, like the book that's coming out in November, the protagonist is like 30, something like that. So
right.
Younger than me. But it's interesting because, as Brian said, life experiences do change. Your interests change, your situations, whatever changes. And I am looking a lot I keep all kinds of journals. And as I'm looking at my journals, they are certainly dealing with things now that I wouldn't have talked or even thought about 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Right.
Years. So who knows? I mean, maybe I'll write something, for 90-year-olds or something.
And Dave says, one of the interesting things living in our area of Niagara is that it's called one of the most haunted places in Canada, and we are surrounded by ghost stories. So what I think he's saying is, you ever think about coming up here and writing a ghost story? Is that an invitation, Dave? John, you're welcome to come and check out our area.
The ghost that goes over the falls in a barrel. I
don't know how that would turn out. The barrel would break, and then there would be nothing there. Therein lies the mystery for the people.
Was there a ghost near to begin with?
Yeah, as a mom, I don't think I want to see Haycorn or Budge go over the falls. that would be too much.
Yeah.
Now, as we grow closer to the end, we shouldn't talk about the end with ghosts. I have the big question that has bothered me for my entire life. And since you've dealt with fiction and nonfiction ghosts, or if you're a non-believer, it's all nonfiction, but you know what I'm saying. Yes, that is Dave was inviting you up to check out Niagara. What?
Okay.
So you're watching this ghost story or you're reading the ghost book, and there's floating heads, there's damage being done, you found out your house is built on a cemetery, all of this is going on, and still the people do not believe it. And they do not, I can't go because of financial reasons. They won't leave their home. Now, my theory is, whether I believe or not, I'm getting out of there. I'm not taking chances. So, but I figure they have to do that in order to have a story. You've worked with real ghost stories. Are people like that in real life? They just won't leave?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, so I'm always amazed because I have the same kind of reaction you do, like, oh, you're staying there? So as I mentioned before, I give a lot of talks, public talks about ghosts from my books, and people will talk about their experiences. And I don't know how many people I have spoken to who will say to me, oh, I have a ghost in my house. And I'll say, what do you mean you have it in your house? Well, I have a ghost in my house. You mean like now you have a ghost in your house? Yeah. And you're living in a house? Yeah. Well, it doesn't bother us. It just moves things around, but it's harmless. And I just say, go away. And, so apparently these aren't, like murderous axe wielding ghosts like in the horror movies. So, but no, there are people that definitely do it. I mean, I've heard people say that they find comfort in it, especially if they think the ghost might be a relative. Like,
No, that's a bit of a different story than
yeah,
if it's
I live at my Uncle George's house, and Uncle George is still here, and I feel good about it. Okay, well, so yeah, and there are people, circumstances won't allow them to move even if they want to, and that's just life. I mean,
I'm sleeping in the car, John.
yeah, well,
I don't care.
I mean, you might have to.
If it's malignant, I don't mind if it's a grandmother or whatever. But if this thing is, the kind of ghost I'm talking about,
Right.
Like in Insidious, I think that's the name.
Yeah.
That I think is a good ghost story, and I wanted to touch on that as well. I personally think that ghost stories are like in a separate, like traditional ghost stories are sort of in a separate genre than horror itself, because it's more about the tragedy, the history, as you've put it. The resolution. They're not all evil. They're just people who've been stuck in a certain place. So I don't see it. Now, Dark Edges has its share of blood and gore.
Right.
But it is like, do you think that's a separate kind of ghost story that is more historical in that? Or, I mean, it can still frighten, but it just frightens. For example, The Woman in Black, the original movie, was one of the most frightening things I had ever saw. Like, that really creeped me out. So do you think that they are like two separate kind of things, or?
Well, so I belong to the Horror Writers Association, and when people think horror, what they think about are, werewolves, vampires, zombies, monsters with claws and teeth that will eat you alive, and that kind of stuff. And certainly that's horror. But the Horror Writers Association also includes in it people that write paranormal stuff, like I do, or even fantasy. So they have a broad definition of what horror is. And I think it's good to have that definition. I think there are sort of subsets to horror. In fact, there's something now called, like cozy mysteries, that term cozy mysteries.
Oh, there's paranormal.
There's cozy horror.
Yes.
Cozy horror.
Is that possible?
Right. And then now they're toning it down to calling it comfy horror. So anyway, but the idea is that the Horror Writers Association recognizes that there are sort of different subsets of what horror actually is. And so I think you're right. I mean, I think a true paranormal ghost story, I think that is not really horror in the hardcore sense of horror. I think it's something different. For me, ghost stories, a really good ghost story, has more of a psychological, metaphysical element to it. It's not just a monster, in a horror story or a horror movie, once you open the closet door and a monster springs out at you, you've seen it. It's done, right? Okay. He does it a second time. Yeah. Okay. Does it a third time. Yeah. Okay. It's there, right? It loses its effect. But what I like about a ghost story, how I think it's different from horror, is that a really good ghost story is much more subtle. It's sort of, there's a lot of, again, uncertainty is a big word when I'm talking about ghosts. But there's uncertainty as to what is actually going on. What is actually happening? Am I in the real world? Am I in some other world? And the tension that creates is all about being a good ghost story too. So those are some elements that I look at as, the subtlety, the tension, and sort of just this kind of a psychological uncertainty is like, I'm not sure what's happening. I think of a movie like, it's a movie, not a book, but think of The Haunting of Hill House.
Yes.
Movie, right?
Yes.
So that was a pretty scary movie. There's a lot of tension, a lot of anxiety in it, but you never, ever, ever saw a ghost. There was no ghost to see.
No, but it was classic ghost story.
Right. It was
ghost story, yeah. And I think they're kind of more emotional too, because you have that story with the ghost, and sometimes you sympathize with it, like, and what's going on with it. So, yeah, no, it is I think it's a separate type of things. I have to look at cozy horror now. Okay, I'm going to have to go find it and find a book. Yeah. Sean, this is
cozy horror, comfy.
this is on our mind. So I think we're pretty good. Did we mention everything you wanted to get mentioned out there? You have a book coming out in November.
Yep, and I'll be happy to talk about that when it comes out.
Come on back. Okay. Your family now. You're not going to get away from us.
I'll be happy to come back in November to talk about it. Believe me. So, but yeah, no, I think it's just been fun. It's been good. Like you said, the book is out. It's on Amazon. You can get it there. It'd be nice if you gets to the bookstores and libraries too, and that'll happen gradually. It's only June. It's only July. It came out in June. So, but yeah, I appreciate the time.
And, no, thank you. This is exactly the ghost story I was looking for. I'm so pumped that I got to talk about it and got to discover it.
And I see you got my website on your ticker there, so
yeah, I'm getting
people can they can get the books through there. They can also contact me with any questions or comments they have as well too. And I've got a blog on there that is a little bit outdated. It's hard to keep a blog, but there's some good stories on there about different paranormal stuff.
Yeah, we can talk about blogs.
I don't want blogs.
Does anybody read them? So thank you very much. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
Right,
okay. November's not that far away. Okay.
It is not.
Take care.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care. Okay. So I am just going to close off comments here. So nobody write any more comments because I won't see them. David, I see yours. Lots of laughs as well. Okay, so comments are going off. All right. That was fun. And so when you're sitting by a when you're sitting by a campfire now, you're all inspired with new ideas, and we'll be looking more at ghost stories in depth over the next couple of months or so, or maybe forever, depending on my mood. Until then, may your coffee be hot and your story sweet. Thanks for listening, everyone.